Also in hindsight, and with a lot of personal resentment with the business of baby mamas, I also look back and I see that, realizing now that people are commenting saying that, V built 50% of this platform and now Becky is encroaching on that.
Here goes.
I beg to differ.
That's not fair to Becky.
No, but I now see your perspective on that side of it, right? Because in the beginning, when you found out about baby mamas and you were blindsided and you were really upset, rightfully so, I was like, what in my head, I didn't say this, but like in my head, I was like, what is Lindsay talking about? I don't understand. You came to Coffee Combos and we built Coffee Combos off of both of us being where we were at. You already had a following. Mm-hmm. The difference between, and this is going to V, if you're listening, this is going to everybody listening. The difference between Lindsay and I starting a podcast and paying our podcast dues was that V came in with a following that already came from me. Her following started from me being on 16 and Pregnant and Teen Mom. So she already shares all of those followers with me. Of course, she's gained her own over a very small fraction of those are on her own, but that already is from me.
So there you go. How Kail one of the ways that Kail truly feels about V, because brace yourself, it's going to get worse. She's going to call her a user and well, she's already calling her a user now, but she's saying V doesn't even have a following without me. She used me. User Muhammad. She's saying, Lindsay, you had a following before. We did Coffee Convos together. But here's the gag. Okay, those of us who tune into Baby Mama's No Drama, I feel like a lot of us didn't know who Lindsay Chrisley was. I can tell you, I know her dad because I used to see him throwing his little shade on the Wendy Williams show. And I always say, I think he's the most hilarious person ever. I wish he got to take over the Wendy Williams show before he went to jail. You know how Jeremy O'Connell took it over or something like that? I was like, him, you've got Todd Chrisley right there. Like I knew her dad, but I didn't know about this girl. Okay. But I knew V, and it's through 16 and Pregnant. Okay. And Teen Mom and whatnot. So V already did have a following. I feel like the majority of us are in the similar position to me, where we knew V from the show, not necessarily Kail, but from like dating Joe, who happened to have impregnated Kail. And here's the thing, Kail's like, oh, like it's from me doing the show, this and that. Well, you only got to do the show because of Joe and Isaac as well. You would not have been on 16 and Pregnant if Joe's swimmer did not impregnate you. And Joe's swimmer is none other than Isaac Rivera. Okay. So it's not a just you thing. It is you three. And you're going to see this a little bit, or you're going to hear this a little bit later on in the podcast episode, but she's going to talk about how Joe built off of me and he never thanked me. V built off me. She never thanked me. Javi built off me. He didn't thank me. Lauren built off me. She didn't thank me. Like all of these people, I'm like, okay, I get where you're coming from with some of these people, but Joe, really, girl, he is a parent to that child, just like you're a parent to that child. You would not have been cast on the show if he would not have appeared as well. I don't think, like they want to see co-parenting dynamics, not someone who just like doesn't exist, unless it was the Janelle situation, because it was the grandma raising the child, which was rather unique, right? Like you didn't have a grandparent there to help you raise your child. You had Joe's family there. And, again, like that was another really interesting part that made your story unique to the show. The fact that you were living with your boyfriend's parents, and then the dynamics that play there. So like he's equal in this with you. He really, really is. But I digress. Let's continue to listen along.
Now, Lindsay and I have built success in the podcasting world, and then V comes in. I share this now, but I didn't know what you were saying back then. And so I couldn't understand your level of upset or discomfort with it. I have a lot of resentment because, and I've said this already, I'll say it again, I want it to be very clear and I don't want it to be as emotionally charged. These people, Joe, Javi, Lauren, V, have all capitalized off of me exploiting my life. And it's really upsetting now. And it's very difficult for me to not build resentment for that. So when I read comments today saying, oh, that is 50% of V's platform. No, it was, I will say 98% my platform, but also a portion of that 98% was our platform from Coffee Combos podcast.
And something else that's really interesting about all of this? It's the fact that she goes, it's all about me, my platform, my this, my that. But then her platform is built off of MTV and 16 and Pregnant, Teen Mom and all that stuff, right? But do you guys remember in her final season, she's talking about all these podcasts she's launching and making more money on there than she did on Teen Mom. The producer tells her, Kail, but that's because of Teen Mom itself, babe. That's because of us. They asked her to acknowledge the fact that she is able to succeed because of the platform that they've provided her with. What was Kail's response? This. Look at them. These two middle fingers and the thumbs. Those were her response when people were asking her to acknowledge the fact that she used their platform and ran with it to elevate herself to another level, which is a good thing, right? Not her reaction, but the fact that she used this platform to continue to build these other brands. But she couldn't even acknowledge that. She just gave them the middle finger. That same girl is now here talking about you guys need to kiss my ass, you use my platform, you users. I really cannot with the Kailprocracy of it all.
Well, I think that we have seen, because we do have secondary shows, that people who were invested in coffee convos with us as a duo wanted to have access to us in other ways on other shows. So naturally that following went from one show to the next show to the next show to the next show. And my biggest issue was someone coming into the podcast space who is not a podcast veteran and being able to capitalize off of that. I don't like it.
And I now agree.
Well, you know what? Too bad for you, Lindsay. And can we talk about the gag? What the gag is here? They're like, we were already successful. We built this. We had followings. We didn't have any of that. And she didn't. She was new to the podcasting space. We were veterans at that point. The gag is this rookie with no following, with no experience in the podcasting space, came along, created a podcast with Kail that was more successful than your OG podcast. The mic drop of it all. The mic drop, honestly, like this sounds like okay, like she ate, y'all. You gotta admit, she freaking ate. Baby Mama's No Drama was the most successful podcast of the three in the Kail podcast universe. They won all of the awards. They had that, what do you call it? What do you call those like billboards that are like videos on Times Square? They had that thing on Times Square. Like they were just so successful. The listenership was highest on there and everything like that. Like V really had a good idea. She cooked. She freaking cooked with Baby Mama's No Drama at the end of the day. And that's something that Kail and Lindsay never actually acknowledge in this Barely Famous podcast episode, which by the way, Barely Famous is the least successful of the podcast. But I'll let you, marinate on that.
And I'm sorry that I felt like I couldn't be honest with you about it to begin with. And I think that I should have. You've always been sort of like a voice of reason. And I think that you do have good advice. And I think now it would have been a better idea for me to come to you and basically present the idea and get your advice or your even perspective or feelings on it. Not that I necessarily needed your blessing, but I think from a business point, you do make very good points and I should have done that. And I maybe wouldn't be here today.
Well, the whole reason you didn't do that, Kail, was because you were trying to backdoor Lindsay with Baby Mamas.
I don't think that it would have changed anything if we had a conversation. I think that you still would have done the show. And I think when you hear an idea and you're like, wow, this will be something like new and something cool and something that we can provide, because we do have a child that goes 50-50 between these homes. And a lot of parents, I think it's like 51% of the population who are dealing with co-parenting issues. I get it. And we don't share that dynamic. So that could have worked, but it only could have worked if you were willing to come to the table fully transparent and she was willing to come to the table fully transparent and you were both 50% providing that transparency.
That's where the resentment started to come in from a business and financial standpoint. Was I was presented this podcast idea under false pretenses and thought that it was going to be an extension of our co-parenting and our personal lives in that way. So when I listen to the end of the era episode of Baby Mama's No Drama and V is sad and V is crying and V is talking about the privacy of her family, I call bullshit.
Ooh.
That was really, really upsetting because I came off very abrasive, but that's because I took a page from your book and was like, let me be direct and clear about this. It was not, I don't think, perceived the way that it should have been, in my opinion. I think my tone should have been different, but also people needed to listen to what I was saying. I was presented this idea under false pretenses. You don't come to me and say that we're going to start a co-parenting podcast and then say that you didn't want to share because you wanted to protect your family's privacy. That goes against the entire reasoning to have the podcast to begin with.
I think looking back on it now, and I was not an advocate for Baby Mamas whatsoever.
Can I also add something right here?
Mm-hmm.
Because you and I have had a sister-like dynamic and, we've been closer in certain periods and we've been business partners in certain periods and we've fought in certain periods, but we've always come back. You are privy to information that I've shared with you over the years in that V has always had a lack of role in co-parenting.
Mhm.
I don't think that I was putting 2 and 2 together until the end of Baby Mamas. Does that make sense?
Mhm.
Like, I was saying it to you from a friend perspective, unrelated to any podcasting stuff. Like, V doesn't co-parent with us, but I wasn't even hearing myself. And then I should have, in hindsight, obviously, I'm like, oh, wow, like she was never co-parenting, but I had shared that with you. And I think that also for you gave you perspective on like, wait, why is she doing this? If I know this, but she's doing this and they're saying this and they're presenting this, but V's not actually co-parenting. So none of this makes sense. You saw that before anybody else saw that.
But I think to me, from an inside perspective, nobody else can see that, right? I look at it and I'm like, wow, that is completely based off of false pretenses and it's fraud.
Fraud.
But I don't think we realized it because we thought being friendly was co-parenting. We thought being friendly was being friends. I mean, it's like the same way when people in general decide, you know, they don't decide, but they come to this realization in their late 20s or their 30s and they're like, wait, those are not my friends, they're my acquaintances, right?
Mhm.
And you have this come to Jesus in your life and you're like, wait, and all of the things are starting to align. It was sort of like that.
So stay tuned, you guys, because she's going to full blown claim that V is a deadbeat who doesn't attend any of Isaac's important moments or milestones.